something took this plane and turned it over and turned it back over, and then we dropped and we shook back and forth. I mean, it was, I have quite a few miles on me, and it was, I can't describe this turbulence.
But it had always been one of these up and down, but never this wild gyration. If you look at pictures of jet streams, you know, drawings, you see like this, it's like a tube of air, and we must have flown, boom, right into the middle of it.
I felt like we were going to die, and there was no way out.
All of us who fly are used to a little bumpy air. That's why we're often surprised to learn just how much damage and injury turbulence can cause. Every year, at least one commercial jet is extensively damaged by turbulence. But the human toll is far greater. In non-fatal accidents, turbulence is the leading cause of injury to airline passengers and flight attendants. Turbulence is defined as the violent, irregular motion of air currents over a short distance. It can occur anywhere in the world, with incidents tending to mirror predominant root structures and unstable weather patterns. Everyone who's flown has experienced some degree of turbulence, ranging in intensity from light or moderate all the way up to severe or extreme. With light turbulence, the aircraft experiences slight erratic changes in altitude and/or attitude. Crew members and passengers may feel a slight strain against their seat belts or shoulder straps. Unsecured objects may be displaced. But people will have little or no difficulty walking, and food service may be conducted. Moderate turbulence also causes changes in altitude and/or attitude, but the aircraft remains in positive control at all times. Passengers and crew members now start to feel definite strains against seat belts and shoulder straps. Unsecured objects are dislodged. Food service and walking are difficult. With severe turbulence, the aircraft experiences large, abrupt changes in altitude and/or attitude. Large variations in indicated airspeed are common, and the aircraft may be momentarily out of control. People are forced violently against seat belts and shoulder straps. Anything that's not secured is tossed about. Food service and walking now become impossible. Extreme turbulence causes the aircraft to be violently tossed about and may even cause structural damage. It's practically impossible to maintain control under these conditions. For all those on board, the experience can be a nightmare. While we may encounter turbulence in any part of the atmosphere, there are some areas where it's most likely to occur. These areas include over hills and mountains, in and near clouds, or in the vicinity of thunderstorms. Light or moderate turbulence often occurs in the lower 5,000 feet of the atmosphere, when surface winds range up to around 30 knots and where the air is colder than the underlying surfaces. Severe turbulence is found on the cold side of the jet stream within 50 to 100 miles of its center. It also occurs in troughs aloft or in lows aloft where vertical wind shears exceed 10 knots per 1,000 feet and horizontal wind shears exceed 40 knots per 150 miles. Extreme turbulence occurs in mountain wave situations, in and below well-developed rotor clouds, and in severe thunderstorms. But not all turbulence is so predictable. Clear air turbulence, or CAT, cannot be detected by radar and is difficult to predict because it is extremely dynamic. About the most predictable thing we can say about CAT is that it often occurs above and to the lee side of mountain ranges and on the poleward side of a jet stream. In the northern hemisphere, that's the north side. But CAT can be found anywhere in any layer of the atmosphere. It is not associated with cumuliform cloudiness, including thunderstorms. So CAT often comes as a complete surprise, and frequently when the seatbelt sign is off. That's why CAT accounts for a significant number of injuries to passengers and crew members. Later, we'll see that the best defense against this kind of unexpected turbulence is to maintain a state of cabin readiness at all times. In other words, expect the unexpected. Data also show that we can expect the most turbulence-related injuries to occur during the cruise phase of flight, and almost twice as many people are injured during moderate turbulence than in a severe episode. Turbulence is hardest on flight attendants, followed by passengers of all ages. Because turbulence is a fact of life when we fly, it may seem inevitable that people will occasionally be injured. But we have much more control over the situation than we may think. There are a number of factors that can help us minimize the effects of turbulence or even avoid it altogether. Some of these include the meteorologist, the dispatcher, flight crew training, complacency, crew communication, and auto flight system management. One way for flight crews to avoid turbulence is to consult turbulence forecasts and summarized reports produced by government or company meteorologists. Use these reports to become familiar with potential hazard areas. The dispatcher also plays a key role in avoiding turbulence encounters. The dispatcher is in the best position to gather incoming weather information from many available sources and should issue a release and flight plan to avoid forecasted areas of significant turbulence. In addition, the dispatcher should transmit new information to the flight that might affect its safety. Flight crew training also affects the outcome of a turbulence encounter. Training must be upgraded to provide the knowledge or skills to deal effectively with the turbulence threat. Complacency is another major factor in turbulence-related injuries. Crew members become complacent simply because turbulence is so common and because many encounters seem insignificant. But as the following real-life incident shows, a flight crew that's complacent about entering areas of turbulence can endanger everyone on board.
When cruising between layers, we noticed some activity on the radar along our route of flight. I thought about making a PA and turning the seatbelt sign back on. I also thought about asking ATC for a deviation, but what we saw on the radar didn't appear like very much, so I felt there was no hurry. 10 to 15 miles before reaching the displayed weather, we encountered severe turbulence. It was a very rough ride and the aircraft lost about 500 feet of altitude. The flight attendant was not seated and ended up on the floor.
Communication between the cabin and cockpit also plays a vital role in the outcome of turbulence encounters. The cockpit crew must inform the cabin crew of impending turbulence, just as the cabin crew must inform the pilots of conditions in the cabin. And the cabin crew should understand that they may have to secure the cabin or seat themselves without orders from the cockpit. Improper use of auto-flight systems is yet another factor in turbulence-related incidents. Later we'll review how to manage the auto-flight system to minimize the impact of turbulence on the aircraft and its occupants. But for now, listen to the following real-life incident for a better understanding of what can happen when the flight controls are not properly used.
The flight encountered moderate turbulence during cruise at flight level 330. A lateral gust induced a roll of about 30 degrees during which the autopilot was disconnected. The wings were rolled level, then to approximately 32 degrees in the opposite direction. The pitch attitude, responding to elevator inputs, increased steadily to about 16 degrees nose up, and the aircraft stalled and pitched down. The pilot continued to apply nose-up elevator deflection as the aircraft nose was dropping due to stall. Aileron and elevator control deflections commanded by the pilot resulted in excessive roll and pitch excursions and at least 4 aerodynamic stalls over a period of about 2 minutes 45 seconds. The pilot thought that the aircraft was experiencing severe turbulence rather than recognizing that he was inducing buffet as a result of a stall.
Overfly thunderstorms if it's possible to clear storm tops by at least 10,000 feet and never less than 5,000 feet. Remember that a thunderstorm in the building stage may grow at over 6,000 feet per minute and contain severe turbulence well above it. Also remember that when climbing to higher altitude for smoother air, the margin to buffet onset is reduced. Many turbulence encounter incidents and accidents have occurred near the limits of the aerodynamic envelope, as you'll see in the following incident.
While cruising at flight level 330, I experienced continuous light chop and thought about climbing to flight level 370 for a smoother ride. I checked the performance data and found that the operation at flight level 370 was in a narrow range between low and high-speed buffet for our gross weight at G-loads of 1.25 at a 37-degree bank angle. Since I didn't anticipate such G-loads or bank angles, I asked for and received clearance to flight level 370. Just as I leveled off, we encountered moderate turbulence, which I perceived put us in the low-speed buffet area. I had no choice but to lower the nose to avoid possibly getting into a stall while simultaneously requesting a lower altitude.
As we mentioned earlier, clear air turbulence cannot be detected by ground-based or on-board radars. Known areas of CAT are broadcast by pilot reports or significant meteorological reports. Even when it's not possible to avoid turbulence, there are still many things crew members can do to minimize injury. Pilots should brief flight attendants at the earliest possible time. In addition to maintaining good communication with the cabin, there are several actions the flight crew should perform to get through the turbulence with minimal disruption. Establish ignition so that an ignition source is always available in case of unusual attitudes or ingestion of heavy precipitation. Minimize throttle adjustments. Throttle should be adjusted only to prevent excessive airspeed variations or to avoid exceeding redline limits. Manage thrust to maintain turbulence penetration speed. Fly to a speed that is within the lowest range of turbulence penetration Mach numbers or airspeeds published for the aircraft. This will reduce the amount of stress on the aircraft structure. Let the autopilot do the work. Most aircraft are equipped with autopilots that will effectively compensate for turbulence. Do not attempt to overpower the autopilot with control forces, because this can cause the autopilot to disengage with too much control input, resulting in over-control during recovery. If the autopilot disengages, the pilot should smoothly apply minimum control force inputs to maintain attitude. Altitude may be sacrificed to maintain attitude. The autopilot may be re-engaged as soon as it's available after recovery. If jet stream turbulence is encountered with direct head or tail winds, change course or altitude, since these areas are elongated with the wind and are shallow and narrow. Maintain course if jet stream turbulence is encountered in a crosswind, because the present course will most likely offer the least exposure time. When crossing a jet stream, climb with the rising temperature and descend with the descending temperature if possible. After any turbulence encounter, pilots are required to report the event as soon as possible. Pilot reports often provide the best available information for turbulence encounters and may be the only information about CAT encounters. These reports are the first line of defense and should be widely disseminated to the ATC agency currently in radio contact, in the blind to other aircraft, and to the airline. As we've seen, a little bumpy air has the potential to cause serious damage to aircraft and debilitating injury to passengers and crew members. Just because turbulence seems to go with the territory doesn't mean we can take it for granted. Avoid turbulence whenever possible, and if you must fly into it, take the necessary steps to reduce its impact. Your fellow crew members and passengers are depending on you. Thanks for watching.